So, Peter, welcome.
Thank you.
We are really privileged having you as a sports psychologist to give us a little help. Give us a quick background about what you do and where.
Sure. I work with athletes, various athletes, different levels, on the mental skills. So it's performance enhancement training or mental skills consultation. It's in the Toronto area, and there's 3 different clinics that I work out of. And I'm a sports psychology service provider to athletes. And I also teach at 2 universities, York University and University of Guelph and Sheridan College in Toronto.
Well, you definitely are going to be the man we're going to pick your brain today. And I've had a lot of coaches who've sent us questions, and one of the biggest questions they want help with is how to help an athlete with pre-match anxiety.
Yeah, and that's one area that athletes, when I see them in person, they talk about. And we just try to kind of switch the terminology a little bit. We won't talk about it as anxiety as much as we talk about it as arousal or energy and pressure. So athletes, when you hear energy and pressure, they have a different kind of feel to it. It doesn't sound as clinical when they talk about it. And where we start off with is more an awareness piece. We try to figure out what their ideal or optimal performance state is with this arousal, right? So we go through what their best performances are, what their not so good performances are, and we try to figure out what are the specific terms that they use, their behaviors that kind of separate one versus the other. And often what athletes talk about doesn't fail. They talk about feeling calm and excited. Like those are 2 words. When they pick it from a word list, it doesn't fail. They pick those 2 as ideal performance states.
It's funny, isn't it? Because they've got to feel excited. They've got to relish the competition. If they're not looking forward to playing the match, then there is potentially a problem.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
If they don't have, call it butterflies for most athletes, but if you don't have that energy, there is something that you have to consider as well. That is not good. So if you don't have this energy in your stomach kind of going through your body, often people don't perform well.
So actually what we would say is it's normal. In fact, it's welcome to have that butterflies in your stomach and feel like you have to go to the washroom just before the match. That is actually going to be something that tells you you're up for it.
Most definitely.
Fantastic.
We often talk about those butterflies. If they're floating around, it's good. If they're not floating around, you have to get them. If they're too heavy, kind of say like butterflies with cement wings, if they're kind of into the pit of your stomach, then you have to be able to work at being able to get it to the ideal performance state. So you need it, just everyone's a little bit different in regards to how they show it.
Yeah. And I think that that's really helpful because so many athletes feel that they shouldn't have butterflies in their stomach. They should be cool. And now you're telling us that actually, if they don't have butterflies, there's something going on. So fantastic. Thanks. That's something they can hang on to. Could we talk a little bit about something else taking on from these butterflies? What about the athlete who has a fear of failure? Or, funny enough, even a fear of success? Both bring their pressures. And how can you help an athlete through those sort of feelings?
Yeah, number 1 would be back to awareness. What are the sources of pressure? That's important. So really being honest. The athlete has to be honest of these are my sources of pressure. Right? So what are they specific to that person? Everyone's different, but we often have our greatest sources of pressure. Number 2, what does it actually feel like? We talked about that in regards to those pressures. And what does it sound like? Right? We all have certain kind of things that we say to ourselves. Some people do it out loud as well. But it's that self-talk. It's the way we talk to ourselves and how our body feels. And those are linked with each other. I'm glad you brought up the fear of failure and the fear of success because they are different. And people will talk about them as being different. Fear of failure, often people don't want to risk take. Right? So their fear of failing, I can't do that. I don't want to do that. I shouldn't do it. The fear of success piece is a little bit different. Right? What comes with the success? It's almost a dread of that. But both of those, they often go back to outcome. Right? It's that outcome of not getting that personal best, not winning a match. It is outcome based, and that is really debilitating for someone who fears and it's failure or fears and success. It's often you hear about the outcomes rather than the process. right? And we talked a little bit about the process, being engaged in the actual skill and enjoyment of the sport, and that gets a little tougher as you get to higher levels, but you still have to keep that perspective.
Absolutely. If you can, as an athlete, just keep looking for one little piece that is better, even in a loss, that you're looking at the process. And life is so much easier then, because you feel like a success, even though you lost the match.
Sure.
You're starting to win the war.
Sure.
And that's what you're looking for.
Well said. It's those little tidbits.
Yeah.
I kind of see it as a bricklayer. I tell athletes, you see a house and it has all these bricks, but it starts with one brick. And then you add the next brick and the next brick. They're little wins. Right? And over a career, you have a lot of little small wins. Unfortunately, sometimes storms come by and the bricks come off, right? But it's being able to build up again. So self-confidence or self-efficacy is built brick by brick. It goes away quickly, but we know that we can learn to get it back, and that's important.
Fantastic. Talking about those little problems that happen and maybe the storms come along, how can athletes avoid distractions? How can they improve their focus? How can they feel that they are much more engaged in each match for longer? Are there things that they can do in practice to help that?
Sure. I think it really comes down to the person, and there's, I think, two important takeaways from this question is some people get distracted internally and some people get distracted externally. The external people who have a preference for the sights and sounds around them, they'll get distracted by them. So it could be a coach talking, it could be a fan, it could be something else that gets their attention around them. The person who's internal is different. The sights and sounds around them really don't impact their distraction. It's their own self-talk that does. Right? So they go deeper into themselves, and it could be this worry, things aren't going well, and then they kind of spiral. Right? So the external person is too broad, so they have to kind of rein it in. And the person who's too narrow on themselves got to get outside of themselves. So it's really interesting to figure out with a person, what is their preference, either internal or external for distractions.
And could a coach help them with that sort of stuff in practice so that they're experiencing it in a safe environment, so that in a match they've actually experienced these things and it's easier for them to maintain their focus?
Sure. Every athlete, be it external distractions or internal distractions, you have to have a plan for moving forward. So we talked about briefly, you and I both, failing fast. You have to figure out how you're going to fail fast. That person who's internal versus external, they're going to have a different plan. So what is the plan for these individuals to be able to move forward? The first thing you have to figure out, be it in a match or in practice, is where you're going to do it. In squash and other sports, you can't take your own personal timeout, right? No. Tell a coach, tell a judge, tell whoever is refereeing, I need my own personal timeout. You can't often do that in sport, but you have to find a place on the court, wherever your kind of field is or your environment is, to be able to start the process of failing fast, right? So where on the court are you going to do this? So there are probably many, but between points, helpful. Yeah. You're going to find where's that opportunity to start the plan. And I think finding where you're going to do it is very important. That's practice. Where do I feel comfortable coming up with my plan to deal with distractions or gain focus?
And when you're talking about failing fast, let's be really clear about what that means to an athlete, okay? Because we're not talking about mistake management here. We're not talking, and athletes will know that in games. They know how to take maybe 2 or 3 centering breaths and get ready for a return of serve. That's something they can do. But when you talk about failing fast, what specifically are you saying?
Number one is that you fail. So you're not going to be perfect. We just throw it right up. It's liberating for all individuals, including athletes.
Not perfect.
Not perfect. Not perfect. Here's a term that someone might take away. I like saying that you're imperfectly perfect. I love that term. That is so freeing for athletes. I wish when I played, it wasn't squash, but different sports, I wish someone told me that you were going to fail, just the best come back better. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's important, that you're going to make mistakes. Right? Even in a win, you're going to make mistakes. Your best performance, you're going to make a mistake. So how do you come back from making that mistake? And that's important. And it really is freeing for an athlete.
And in terms of drills and fun kind of things, we've got to recognize that mental skills are actually skills. Just like learning how to hit a forehand and a backhand, you have to practice your mental skills.
Sure.
Correct?
Sure.
Have you got two or three skills or practices that you could suggest to athletes that would be really helpful to them?
Yeah, so one would be in regards to, you mentioned breathing. I think breathing, after you find that kind of place on the court, you have to be able to take those breaths. But what athletes do often incorrectly with breathing, they breathe from their shoulders and their chest. So especially when they're running a lot and they're trying to get that break, they'll continue to from their chest and their shoulders go up. And that actually speeds up the process even more. So if you can kind of center, find somewhere on the court and belly breathe through your nose for 3 seconds and inflate your belly, very important, right? Extremely important. If you can gain your breath, you're going to be able to think a little bit better.
Yeah.
Right? So that's important. A second one, and you can look it up online if you want to, it's called progressive muscle relaxation. When we're feeling tense, all of our blood and oxygen goes to our big muscle groups. So for squash players, it's going to be in their thighs, it's going to be in their arms, it's going to be in their shoulders. And when we get tight, when pressure increases, our muscles get tight because of those kind of reasons. If you just contract your muscles for about 5 seconds and let them go, it actually allows the blood and oxygen to go to all of the muscle groups that you need. So that would be one. So simple. It sounds so easy, but athletes fail to do it.
And that's a sort of skill that they could learn to do in bed before they go to sleep first, and then they can start to learn to put it into a drill situation on the court so that it's got to the point where actually they understand the skill and they can use it in a match when needed.
Yeah, it's like any skill, from a backhand or forehand or point management. You have to practice. It's not going to come in real time if you never practiced it.
No.
If you have not practiced it, that final point that you need and you are nervous, it's not going to come unless you practice. And these specific mental skills don't show up on a scoreboard. However, we do know that they're extremely important. They can be the win or loss or point that you need, but it never shows up on the scoreboard that athlete actually was able to handle the pressure.
So, Peter, in closing, would you say that it's very important for athletes, A, to know themselves?
Yes.
To be honest about how they're feeling so that they can then manage it one way or another. Either they're too anxious or not anxious enough, they're not energetic enough. Mm-hmm. That they really start to take this mental side of the game as a skill, and with their coach develop strategies that will help them mistake manage, help them create the right energy, the calmness before a match, and help them really compete at their best so they can challenge themselves and their opponent and not fear the failure, not fear the mistake, mm-hmm. and not care if they've hit one ball in the tin. It doesn't matter. Go on and go to the next point.
Sure. And being able to evaluate that, right, on your own or with your coach, go through these in practice, but also after matches, right? So how did you come back from this specific situation? How did you handle, or kind of that pre-performance routine? How did you get ready for that point?
Yes.
Right? Or that match? And really kind of talk about it, but evaluate it and say, this is what I did well, and this is what I need to improve on. And one thing that's very important, another maybe takeaway from the video is, I call it the 3-to-1 rule. There should be 3 things that each athlete, when they debrief, they believe they've done well mentally. And then 1 thing that they can improve on. It's often the reverse. So often athletes go, I have to work on, I have to be more confident, I have to be this and this, 3, and maybe they have 1 thing that they did well. Even on your worst performances, you have to switch it around. A 3-to-1, right? So we're not saying you don't have to improve on things, you do, but here are 3 things that I did well. And that builds confidence from match to match, practice to practice. So that debrief on your own with a coach on these mental skills, very important.
Peter, this has been very enlightening. Thank you so much. We're going to see our athletes just go from strength to strength.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Take care.
You too.